About 40 miles north of Denver on I-25, a bright sign with the face of a cheerful beaver starts to come into view. It's a signal to interstate travelers that this is their chance to turn off, make a pit stop, and grab some jerky at Buc-ee's.
That's humongous.
Humongous, not just in the eyes of a 6-year-old. Massive, enormous are the other common adjectives used to describe a Buc-ee's travel plaza. The convenience store at this one, at the Johnstown exit in Weld County, is bigger than a football field inside. And it's surrounded by more than 100 gas pumps, which on this Saturday are busy. Inside, the store is packed with travelers and gawkers, eager for a freshly made brisket sandwich. Or looking to snag some fudge from the sweet shop. There are Buc-ee's branded fountain drinks and plenty of merch and other goodies flashing the chain's ball cap wearing beaver mascot.
Aww, he looks cute.
For that kid you heard up top, the icy machine was the main event.
Was it good? Do you like the icy?
Buc-ee's began in Texas in 1982. It's known for its expansive square footage. In fact, the chain boasts 2 world records: largest convenience store and longest car wash. Its bathrooms are apparently so clean and tidy, they've been deemed award-worthy.
In the last 6 years, Buc-ee's has rapidly expanded beyond Texas, with locations in 11 states now. And as it's grown, Buc-ee's has become a destination in its own right, and it's amassed a very enthusiastic fan base.
Buc-ee's is great. It's an experience. You got to come in, you got to get your merch, get your snacks.
Buc-ee. Florida has Disney World. We have Buc-ee's.
Buc-ee's is a 24/7 kind of a deal. These bright lights make sure the parking lots are as welcoming at 3 a.m. as they are at 3 p.m. And the cars just keep rolling in.
Almost as soon as that first Colorado Buc-ee's opened its doors last year, the company started laying the groundwork for a second store, a 2-hour drive south of this one, in northern El Paso County. But it's running into some fierce opposition.
And just like everything else about Buc-ee's, the fight over whether it will come to Monument Hill has been larger than life, with more flavors of political intrigue than its famed wall of jerky.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance, a show about Colorado politics and policy. I'm Benta Birkeland. For this episode, we're on the move, from that first Buc-ee's in Johnstown to Monument Hill in El Paso County. That's where a fight over where and maybe even whether a second Buc-ee's might someday be built has been bubbling over. My companions on this Purplish road trip are Andrea Chelfin, managing editor for KRCC, Public Radio for Southern Colorado, and KRCC reporter Brianna Heaney. Thanks so much for talking us through all this.
Oh yeah, thanks, Benta.
Thanks, Benta. Hello.
We're going to be spending a lot of this episode talking about the town of Palmer Lake. If you've ever driven between Colorado Springs and Denver, then you've likely seen signs for it off the interstate. But to actually get to the town itself, you have to make a little bit of an effort.
To get there, you get off the highway and follow this curved 2-lane road into town. You can guess from the town's name, it does indeed have a lake at the center of it, and the community is tiny. Fewer than 3,000 people call Palmer Lake home.
I think the best word for it as a town is bucolic. When you get there, it feels like this little mountain retreat far away from city life. It's super quiet with one main drag through the town full of trees and quaint restaurants and a regularly used railroad.
I talked to one woman who described it to me as a place where you'd picture a Hallmark movie. Susan Miner said people take care of each other, and disputes, even divisive ones, have typically been resolved fairly smoothly.
Years ago, we had a tie for mayor, and our clerk stood on a chair, and they used Bob Radosevich's dad's hat, and they put the names in the hat, and she drew from the hat. I mean, that's how things were settled here. So we've had issues where there was a lot of passion on either side of the issue. But when it was over, it was over. And everybody shook hands and said, let's go have a beer at O'Malley's.
O'Malley's is one of a handful of restaurants in town. But Miner says that's just not how things are right now. She's pro Buc-ee's and says she's lost some friendships over it.
There's a group of people that we just don't talk about it, and that's fine. There's a very small group of people that is so involved in the social media that there's just not enough common ground between us anymore to not talk about it. It would be a nod at the grocery store and that kind of thing.
For almost a year now, this small town has been the site of a bitter political battle over whether Buc-ee's should be able to build a travel plaza there.
Big development proposals do stir up big opposition, but there are some elements in this fight that make it stand out and seem to illuminate a story larger than the town of Palmer Lake itself.
Yeah, when you look into the Buc-ee's fight, you get into questions about representative government and what happens when the people who will be most affected have the least say in the political process.
It's also a story of the way contentious issues can split communities apart. There have been lawsuits and allegations of vandalism.
And the debate highlights the trade-offs small communities sometimes face as they weigh their current way of life against the need to secure their future. I think we need to just lay out some basic information about this development proposal. And let's start with the parcel Buc-ee's wants to build on.
Sure. The first thing that you need to know is that the land is not in Palmer Lake, at least not right now. It's a plot that lies on the west side of I-25, right by the top of Monument Hill in unincorporated El Paso County.
And that's a big challenge for the company. It requires a huge amount of water to develop and operate a travel plaza. And Buc-ee's just can't show up and drill a well. They need to be covered by one of the nearby town's water rights. Earlier in the process, they did go to the neighboring town of Monument. They got turned down.
So last year, Buc-ee started talking to Palmer Lake about what's called a flagpole annexation. Basically, the town would extend its boundaries 2 miles to the east, connected solely by County Line Road. So you look at it on a map, and it would look like a flagpole with a flag hanging off of it.
It came up mid last year, around August, September. We were approached by the land developer asking if it's something that, due to Palmer Lake having and owning so many water rights, if it's something that Palmer Lake would be willing to explore.
This is Glant Havener. She was Palmer Lake's mayor when Buc-ee's first started looking at that parcel of land. She told me that as long as an applicant fills out the correct paperwork, the town has to consider their application for annexation. And last December, the town's board of trustees did agree that the land could be eligible for annexation. That was a 4-1 vote.
Eligible for annexation. So just so I'm clear, the board of trustees is voting that the town could annex this land. Not that it for certain would annex the land, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. This was a required step, but it really just started the process. The board still hasn't actually voted on whether or not to do the actual annexation.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. But going back to this vote, it's 4-1, pretty wide margin. But this Buc-ee's project was pretty contentious almost right from the beginning.
Oh yeah, I mean, just weeks after that vote, a coalition of local groups filed a lawsuit against the Board of Trustees, accusing them of breaking open meeting laws and violating residents' free speech rights.
given how controversial this immediately became, what's the incentive for Palmer Lake here? What would the town get out of Buc-ee's that would make officials want to vote yes?
Well, for Palmer Lake, the deal offers some big pluses. The town would get a huge amount of new sales tax revenue, and Buc-ee's is promising to upgrade Palmer Lake's water infrastructure. This aspect is huge. Supporters of the annexation point out that it's expensive to build water infrastructure, things like a new treatment plant and drilling new wells, and the town doesn't really have that money. So they say, let's let Buc-ee's front the cash for this stuff. So the big benefit for residents, they get the water infrastructure they have been needing without having to pay extra taxes.
I definitely heard that sentiment from some of the supporters I spoke to. They think the project makes sense as a way to get this critical infrastructure, and also point out that with increased tax revenue, they can upgrade things like their fire station.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting, though, that like any big development, there is a tax incentive on the table here. So Buc-ee's is going to front this money, but they'll be getting some of it back over the next 2 decades. The company would get to hold on to a third of the local sales tax it collects, to the tune of around $500,000 a year.
For some people in the town, it feels like a pretty small price. They see Buc-ee's as sort of offering to bring Palmer Lake into the future.
Yeah, and as the proposal kept inching forward, some people were increasingly worried that the Palmer Lake Board would eventually approve it. That said, when I interviewed Havener in May, she was really careful not to say whether she was for or against the project. But I did find it interesting to hear how she talked about the Buc-ee's in Weld County.
It was large. I gasped. The first time I drove, I've been up there twice to just see at different times of the day, and spoke with the mayor there and asked questions and spoke to businesses around there, just getting a feel for what the people really thought, what the businesses thought, how 6 months in it had impacted businesses or not.
She claimed that, according to what she heard, traffic to other local businesses actually increased after Buc-ee's opened, and that when there were issues with the very bright parking lot lights, Buc-ee's worked with the community to fix them. So she was pretty optimistic about it all at the time.
So Havener appears to have a pretty good impression of the company and its potential for the community, even though she's not weighing in explicitly at this point. But then, all of a sudden in June,
Palmer Lake Mayor Glant Havener is resigning. That's according to a statement that she sent me just over an hour ago. Havener was elected.
Now, in that letter, she didn't mention the Buc-ee's controversy directly, but she did urge people in the town to trust their elected officials and asked residents to not, quote, let the bullies win. Then,
there are new details following the resignation of the mayor of Palmer Lake. Glant Havener stepped down last week, just days after dozens of texts were released online, allegedly involving the former mayor over the town's handling of a potential land annexation for Buc-ee's. Those texts were then included in a massive 50-plus page lawsuit naming the former mayor and other town officials.
wow, okay, so I'm assuming these text messages were not positive.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, what happened was a local Republican official who is also that former mayor's friend released screenshots of chat messages between this official, Havener, and a lobbyist for Buc-ee's. They sent each other running commentary during meetings, sometimes complaining about people fighting the Buc-ee's proposal, sometimes predicting how trustees would vote.
You can actually see the screenshots because they got added to a lawsuit against Palmer Lake officials. From some of them, it looks like Havener had created fake social media accounts to defend herself online. Havener acknowledged these were her texts and told a local TV station it was a reminder to live by what we tell kids. Never put anything in writing that you wouldn't want the whole world to see.
So none of this looks good optically, but when it comes to Buc-ee specifically, the fact that the mayor at the time was texting like this with the company's representative, I imagine for opponents of the project, it looked way too cozy.
Yeah, she was already named in that lawsuit that I mentioned, and when she and I talked well before the text messages came out, Havener told me all the vitriol about the project was just making her really sad. Obviously, opponents would say she was a part of all that, as those text messages show, but it's clear the situation really affected her view of the town.
What's changed is the peacefulness of this beautiful, tradition-filled small-town community. I can no longer go to the grocery store. I can no longer go to restaurants in the area. I can no longer really go anywhere in public.
Havener's resignation was one of those moments where it really spilled out into the open. She was the first Palmer Lake politician to lose her office over this, but she wasn't the last.
We've heard why some supporters really want to move ahead with Buc-ee's, but this seems like a good point to spend time talking about the opposition. What are the main arguments and concerns against a Buc-ee's near Palmer Lake?
Probably at the top of the list for people in the town is water.
Okay, well, tell me how this works, because just a few minutes ago, we're saying the main argument for building a Buc-ee's is that it would help the town with its water supply.
That's true. Buc-ee's is offering to help the town tap into water rights it isn't currently using. But opponents worry at the end of the day, the Travel Plaza's demand is going to more than counterbalance the extra water from the new wells and cost the town a lot of money.
I would point out, though, that this project will not have a car wash, which are typical at Buc-ee's locations. But Buc-ee's is known for its expansive clean bathrooms, and all that flushing and hand washing and mopping, well, that means a lot of water.
I heard that concern even from people who are sort of on the fence about the overall project. And yes, those people do exist. I talked to quite a few of them. You know, water is such a critical resource in Colorado. People get nervous about it.
I don't know. I also am really protective of our amazing water, and I would like to see that protected. So that does give me pause for sure, the water.
A report released earlier this year said Buc-ee's would increase water demand in Palmer Lake by at least 20%, plus another 11% for other development that could occur along this flagpole.
Okay, so there is this concern about water. What about other aspects of the project?
Yeah, another one you hear a lot is the lighting. This part of northern El Paso County and southern Douglas County, well, it still gets really dark at night. And that's a big draw for some people who choose to live in the area. So some are worried about all that light pollution.
Kind of related to that, there's concern about the impact on wildlife. The proposed site is really just over the top of the hill from all that open space in the Greenland Valley.
And that's the big undeveloped valley you go through if you're driving on that stretch of I-25 between Monument Hill and Larkspur.
Exactly. It's a really pretty part of the drive between Colorado Springs and Denver, maybe one of the last pretty parts. It's protected by conservation easements, people bike and hike there, but it's also a big wildlife area. The state is actually building what it claims is the world's largest wildlife overpass over a major roadway in the valley to help elk and deer and antelope move through the area.
And that's gotten some pretty big conservationists involved in the Buc-ee's opposition. The annexation itself would not cross into the physical boundaries of those protected spaces, but there's a lot of worry that the Travel Plaza's massive presence could still really impact them.
I saw just recently Governor Jared Polis and both of Colorado's U.S. senators sent Buc-ee's a letter urging the company to pick a new location away from that valley because of how it could impact the open space and the animals that travel through it.
Honestly, a lot of why people are saying Buc-ee's would be bad for wildlife is also exactly why people living nearby don't want it. I talked to a few residents who would live within eyeshot of a potential Buc-ee's. Those folks were some of the most ardent voices against it.
And that is one of the interesting kind of ironies of this proposal. Because it's an annexation and an annexation well outside of the current border of Palmer Lake, the people who would be most directly impacted don't live in the town where the decision will be made.
Exactly. For those folks, they feel like Palmer Lake has the ability to put this thing over the hill, out of sight for them, and then reap all the benefits.
But as we mentioned, Palmer Lake isn't unified behind this, and that's what we'll get to next. This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance. When we started to plan out this episode, one thing that became clear is that town meetings in Palmer Lake are a place where the vitriol in this saga is maybe the most on display.
Yeah, that's right. Palmer Lake has a very cute, very old town hall. But when you get a lot of people there to talk about Buc-ee's, well, it really does get fiery.
Well, I want to zero in on one meeting in particular. This was a pretty important vote by the Planning Commission in early September. Bree, you were covering that meeting. What was it like?
The first thing that struck me was the law enforcement presence, which I would describe as heavy for a town the size of Palmer Lake. There were about a dozen officers in and around the building, and I was told that's the new normal for these meetings that involve Buc-ee's.
Now, from what I can understand, the Planning Commission makes recommendations, but this group doesn't actually have the power to approve or reject the project. That's up to the Palmer Lake Board of Trustees.
Yeah, exactly.
But I can imagine this was still a pretty significant vote. However it goes, the side that wins is going to argue it shows that they're right, and it could maybe even shape public opinion, along with potentially influencing the trustees.
I think that's right. The recommendation from the Planning Commission carries weight, and the hearing got pretty tense. The meeting started off with Commissioner Andre Bergeron revealing he'd been threatened over this.
Attempt intimidation, where I live and who my family is. That property damage. So this has compromised my ability to a fair and balanced recommendation either way. I informed the town attorney. I feel I must recuse myself because it created a bias for me.
There was another point in which pretty much everyone was arguing and literally yelling at each other. The police chief, the crowd, the commissioners.
Pros and cons of this specific accusation. I want to give this an absolute fair shake. I'll let it proceed. I'm sorry, am I abusing you, sir?
Hey, please, are you?
Yes, I'm tired of you. If you give me one more of those looks, sir.
So wait, can you help me understand what we're hearing here?
Okay, so Commissioner Michael Beeson was arguing with the police chief over information that he had asked for and was not being provided with. Then he basically turned to one of the Buc-ee's representatives who was sitting in the front row and started berating him, saying he didn't like the way he was looking at him.
So we've got the police chief and other people in the room just kind of talking over each other. Is there someone trying to bring order to the meeting?
Yeah, kind of. The crowd in attendance was mostly Buc-ee's opponents. The chair of the Planning Commission is pro-Buc-ee's and was pounding the gavel. And when that wasn't calming things, he turned to the crowd and...
Why don't you just sit there and shut your mouths and listen to what he's saying?
Wow, okay. Well, that's one way to try to bring order to the meeting. I imagine that did not go over very well.
Yeah, it didn't really work. After 3 hours and a narrow vote of 3-2, the Planning Commission ended up recommending against the annexation. This felt like a pretty significant moment. The first time any officials in the town had voted against the idea of Buc-ee's.
Bill Fisher, no. Vote you got
Do you view this pivotal moment as kind of a momentum shift?
Yeah, it felt like it, a bit. Annexation had been getting the go-ahead, little vote after little vote. And this felt like a real change, to have the planning board say they aren't comfortable with this project and the town shouldn't go ahead with it.
I guess a question I have here, this was just a few officials, the Planning Commission. Do people in Palmer Lake feel that same way?
Well, that's been a huge question throughout this entire process. How do people in Palmer Lake really feel? Supporters of the project said a lot of the opposition was just being blown up online. It was coming from outsiders with what the former mayor called keyboard courage and didn't really reflect how Palmer Lake itself feels.
But this month, people in the town finally got to formally weigh in. See, opponents managed to get enough signatures for a recall election. They wanted to get rid of the town trustees who voted yes at the annexation meeting all the way back in December. And they put another question on the ballot. Should voters have the power to approve or deny all annexation proposals?
Explain how the vote went down.
The election happened less than a week after that Planning Commission meeting. It's been a busy month on the Buc-ee's front. Both of the trustees who were up for a recall got removed and replaced by people who don't support the annexation. And the voters passed the ballot question that will mean all future annexations will have to go to a popular vote.
And this recall election was really a watershed moment in the Buc-ee's fight. It came almost exactly a year after the company first started talking publicly with Palmer Lake. It wasn't a landslide, but it was decisive.
Voters did seem pretty clear that they want to have the final say on annexations. They voted for that idea by a 2-to-1 margin. As one opponent to the annexation said, a decision this big shouldn't rest in the hands of just a few trustees.
So, is that the end of our story here? Is Buc-ee's done in Palmer Lake?
I think it's too soon to say for certain. I mean, you have more people on the Palmer Lake Board of Trustees who don't support the project. And even if the board did approve it, like Andrea said, the company would still have to convince a majority of voters in Palmer Lake. So I'd say it's not looking great for the gas station/convenience store chain.
I reached out to Stan Beard to ask him about that. He's the director of real estate and development for the company. He said Buc-ee's still intends to move forward and present their case to the trustees in early October, and that's when Palmer Lake trustees will vote on whether to do the annexation. Beard said he feels empathy for the people who live closest to the proposed site.
There is no doubt that we will have an impact, whether, negative, positive, or whatever. It's going to be different at that intersection. The surprise in my mind is that Palmer Lake is not seemingly looking at this as just an unbelievable opportunity. And I'm sorry that, we must not have done our job.
This is really a fork in the road for the Monument Hill Buc-ee's. Maybe the company keeps trying to move forward with Palmer Lake, or maybe it looks for a new route to get the water it needs. Or maybe this whole effort is just dead. We just don't know yet. But it's not only the company that's at a turning point. People in Palmer Lake need to decide where they go as a community now.
Yeah, and it's not just the community of Palmer Lake that's been affected by this, though. I think one reason this got so heated is because this is a proposal that has the potential to reshape the Tri-Lakes region, and all the power to decide whether it happens or not rests with the board of just one town there. I spent an afternoon with people gathering signatures for the recall, but none of them actually lived in Palmer Lake. This was Aaron Keller.
To me, it's crazy that only 1,600 to 1,700 voices are going to have that much influence on maybe a multi-million-dollar corporation coming in, the world's largest gas station, and then the town signing an agreement that could put them in a bad spot for decades. That's just really weird to me.
Even on election night, while we were waiting for recall results, the people I met who came by that night weren't Palmer Lake voters. But they all lived extremely close to where the proposed annexation is and wished they had a say.
Yeah, and to me, this brings up the question of whether flagpole annexations are really democratic because the annexing town gets all the say. But the people who are most affected are on the wrong side of the line, and they get left out of the process.
It sounds like this has torn the whole area apart, not just Palmer Lake. I did talk to a woman who's a longtime resident of Palmer Lake who said she's just been staying offline and kind of trying to ignore what's happening. She said she's not living in denial, but really trying to keep her distance. And I was sort of surprised by how Mark Waller talked about this experience. He's a former Republican state lawmaker. He's a former El Paso County commissioner. He lives in Palmer Lake. And during this whole process, Waller has been the on-the-ground consultant for Buc-ee's.
I'll tell you, I have never seen in my almost 18 years of politics the level of vitriol associated with building a gas station.
Waller went through plenty of contentious debates at the State House. He was on the El Paso County Commission. He's seen a lot of topics throughout his political career, but he said the Buc-ee's fight blows them all away.
I mean, that's what we're talking about, a travel center. It's a big one, but a travel center on I-25 between the two largest cities in Colorado. And people took the approach to this like it's being built in the middle of the Pike National Forest and that it was going to somehow just completely destroy their way of life.
Well, that's certainly one way to look at it. We did go through all the reasons people around it are concerned, so I do think it's fair to say for opponents, it's a lot more than just a jumbo-sized gas station.
But you do hear that from people on both sides of the issue. This is sort of a sense of wonder that a gas station or a travel plaza had the power to tear their town apart. This is Nancy Yerka. She's the wife of a town trustee who hasn't really been on board with the project.
It's just all this wild human nature that has erupted over a gas station and beaver nuggets. So the big thing is, after all is said and done, how is the town going to get back together, unified, and get along? That's the big question.
It is a big question. I mean, over the course of reporting this story for the last few months, I have observed the rhetoric escalate. And I kind of feel like you can't separate that from what we're seeing nationally, this sense that Americans, both private citizens as well as public figures, seem to have more and more difficult time being civil with people they disagree with. Everything feels like it comes with such high stakes.
A lot of people I talk to blame social media, and they say it's amped everything up and let people be so much worse to each other than they would be in person. This isn't new, but it does continue to escalate tensions.
But as this story shows, it doesn't just happen online. Look at that planning commission meeting I was at. It was like an argument in the comment section come to life.
When I talked to Waller, he thinks it's part of the times we live in now, and he said the country has normalized nastiness in politics.
We have said it's okay to show up to the school board meeting. It's okay to show up to the town council meeting. It's okay to show up to any other public meeting and yell and scream from the audience and say whatever you want in that circumstance with absolutely no accountability associated with it at all. I wish I could say that was unique to this community, but it seems that this is something that's been normalized across the nation, at least as far as I can tell. It's terrible.
When I talked to people about the Palmer Lake Buc-ee situation, they all brought up the killing of Charlie Kirk and this feeling that angry rhetoric is more and more often turning into violence. Obviously, it's a pretty big continuum from people arguing over a development proposal to a political assassination. But in some people's minds, they do see a connection to just how hateful things are, and it's really upsetting to them.
And there are people in Palmer Lake who are scared for their safety. There was that planning commissioner who said his family had been threatened.
You know, though, these fights over growth and development, they're just going to keep happening, especially here in Colorado as it keeps growing. It is worth noting that other communities in the country, well, some are putting up a similar resistance to Buc-ee's. So how do we have these conversations in a way that is inclusive and civil, where people feel like they're being heard and elected officials have the trust of their constituents to make the right decisions?
This brings me back to something Susan Miner said. She's the one who says some of her friendships have suffered, nodding to people in the grocery store instead of having a conversation. And she thinks healing and the community can come together again, but that it'll be a slow process.
We'll move on. I don't know that we'll move past it. It might take a good bit of time for this to go away. But Palmer Lake survives. We always have.
That's it for this episode. Purplish is a production of member-supported Colorado Public Radio and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.
The CCNA is a collaboration between KUNC News, Colorado Public Radio, Rocky Mountain PBS, and the Colorado Sun, with support from news outlets throughout the state. Funding for the Alliance is provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'm Andrea Chalfin.
I'm Brianna Heaney.
And I'm Benta Birkeland. Our producer is Stephanie Wolf, and our editor is Megan Verlee. Sound design and engineering by Shane Rumsey. Our theme music is by Brad Turner.
Purplish will be back in your feeds in 2 weeks. Subscribe now so you don't miss an episode.
This is Purplish from listener-supported CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.